So once you do the, I would say the reworking today, believe me, it will be much faster and it will also be much better, so that it will also help us to get into the scoring mode also much better. So I think mainly, first of all, thanks for trying out. Most of you, I think over the last 1 hour or so, I was able to receive most of the comments, whatever you have given, and also I've consolidated it. So we'll make use of it as we go ahead. So before we get into today's deliberations, and then anything anybody would sort of try to share some important learnings what you got yesterday. I mean, it can be at random, not an issue. As you learned some of the new concepts yesterday, if you can just share, that will be good for the benefit of the group. And also any points that wherein you also need some clarification, also please do let me know. We will also clear those doubts. Yes, please, anybody can start.
So good morning. This is Amit.
Good morning.
Yeah, so yesterday we went through a lot of concepts, and the key thing was that the essential difference between what is an assessment process and what is the audit process.
Okay.
So the key difference between these two processes was there. And how is the approach different from a PDCA model that was also shared by you?
Okay.
The inputs regarding contradictions of excellence, they were also handy in order to understand the process. And we went through in detail about the dimensions of the organizational effectiveness,
Yeah.
inclusivity of the same, or the comprehensiveness of the same, predicting it, and then sustaining the process. So these were some of the key findings of yesterday's session. I look forward to input from others also.
Yeah, very good, Amit. Just to, I think perfectly said, when we are trying to assess excellence, one is we need to have a common denominator because all of us are coming in from different backgrounds. So first we look at financial success, which is the cornerstone of any organization in any excellence framework. Followed by that, the company or the applicant needs to demonstrate things going beyond compliance. And then the few other points are also in terms of inclusive, both with respect to the stakeholders given the business context and also all categories of people. That is another point. And then based on the needs and expectations, the company should have done justice to, I would say, majority of the stakeholder needs and expectations. And those should have been enabled by a good backend process in place. That is where we also talked about that predictable success. And the last one being the results. What the applicant has demonstrated should not be a sort of a flash in the pan. And that's also one of the reasons as to why we ask a 3-year data point, so that we are very clear and we have that absolute conviction saying that yes, the company is doing well, the processes are giving the desired results, and we are able to see a northward trend or at least a positive trend, so that the performance does not dip. These are some of the traits or the characteristics when we are wanting to qualify any organization as excellent. Thanks, Amit. Thanks for that. Yes, please. Anybody else? Any other points? I think you also mentioned about the audit versus assessment, about not being very more of a checklist oriented thing. We don't go by a done or not done, by a tick mark or an into. Here in an assessment, it is more about maturity. Just to add another point, audit is something like black and white, very easy to find out. Adherence to a particular standard or a compliance or an SOP or whatever. But when we are trying to look at assessment, it is always a shade of gray. Shade of gray is always difficult to find. Like if you have painted your house, next time around you would want to repaint it. Believe me, there is no way that you will get the same color and the same shade. It's just not possible. So assessment is always a shade of gray, very difficult to find out. Yes, despite all that, whatever is the Opal and the tool, whatever we have, it helps us to probably bring down that element of subjectivity to a great extent. But what we need to also understand is any assessment framework in the world is not 100% objective. Assessment is always it does carry some element of subjectivity, but to a great extent, the assessment tools that we use will help us to take out that subjectivity. Yes, please. Anybody else? Any other points?
Good morning, Mr. Shiva. This is Vijay Lakshmi.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. Good morning.
Actually, yes, when I was going through that for completing the task which you had given, I felt as if I was looking for mistakes and then trying to find out the strengths. This is the kind of mindset that we should go about when we are going for an assessment.
That's good. Anyway, when we go through those statements today, probably we will realize that whether we are still an auditor at heart or whether we're slowly going ahead over the next 3-4 days. How is it that we will slowly able to maybe transform or metamorphosize ourselves from an auditing mindset to an assessment mindset? I think that's what is the challenge that lies in front of us with the next 4 days. Yes, please. Anybody else? Anybody else wants to share any other points that we discussed yesterday? Any clarifications that are required on the leadership portion of it that we covered, leadership and the strategy? So no clarification so far as what I understand? Or all of you are still warming up for the day? Okay. So if no questions, we will start off with the day 2. We'll start off with the day 2 proceedings. And I think yesterday, more or less, one is, of course, we discussed on the model. This was the main thing that we discussed. Somehow none of you touched upon that. Anything on the model? Let me try to recap something on the model. One is going by what you see as a part of this visual. One is the enablers are the ones that drive the result. And you are also seeing a PDCA in this model. The PDCA, what you are seeing is in the line that goes through at the bottom, which talks about that review, learning, and innovation. So when we say review would mean both the review of the results plus also reviewing the enablers. In other words, whenever there is a process, the process throws out a result. So the results come in 2 forms. One is a lag indicator, one is a lead indicator. Whether it is a lag or a lead indicator, irrespective of that, the results will tell you a story. Meaning to say that either, let's say, you might see that the graph is moving up, or probably there might be some variation, or something might be going down. So due to which there will be some learning, there will be some thinking that gets created based on the results, whatever you see. So that thinking should propel you towards that learning. What is it? When you look at the results, what do you learn? Something is going okay, or something is not going right, etc. Those are what the inferences, what you get. And at the same time, let's say when you're reviewing the results, you have your management review. People come up with different points of time. People come up with different reactions. Somebody would say what went well, what went wrong, or somebody would say that company X is following this particular practice, or maybe you would have done your research. Maybe you say that, look, this is what leading organizations are doing. So learning comes with plenty of external and internal insights. So post the review, creativity should enable. Creativity will also lead you to learning from your own experiences, plus as well as learn from the external world. And both of them, when applied, the point that goes next to learning is to do with innovation. And I also said yesterday that innovation and improvement, both of them can be seen in the same vein. But when we say innovation, it is nothing but creativity that is applied will become innovation. Innovation can be a product innovation, it can be a service innovation, it can also be a maybe a business model innovation, anything. Innovation need not be ascribed only to finances. Process innovation can also happen. So next is when we say innovation would also come in from, I would say the resultant of the innovation could be in different forms. It can be an incremental one, it can be a significant one, it can be unique, it can be breakthrough. Anything under the sun is possible, and those are absolutely fine. And whenever when you are trying to assess an organization, don't go saying that no, you have not done innovation, etc. Any improvements that have been done in the process could also qualify for that. So as far as the excellence model is concerned, any idea that has been implemented that has resulted in an improved process will qualify under innovation, because each company has a different definition for innovation. So we must not get biased by that, because when we go out to a company, the language that they speak could be different. For example, somebody might be using Kaizen, somebody might be using Six Sigma, somebody might be using something else. It's absolutely fine. Ultimately, all the tools and techniques are what? Those are for eliminating the variation in the process and then taking the process to the next level. So as a part of it, you may come across various improvements that give you varying degrees of success. So that is how we need to look at that. And another point that I also try to reinforce, you will see that today and tomorrow much more clearly, that all the boxes are seamlessly connected. There is excellence cannot be there in silos. And those of you who are applicants, please remember that you are not trying to get an award or recognition for your process. Unless and until leadership is linked up to L&D and then on to many of the other processes onto the business results, then it is of no use. Ultimately, everybody must be able to sync up to the ultimate objective of the organization. That is what is more important. We are not trying to look at only excellence in silos. We are looking at holistic excellence. In fact, it would also be very good when you are facing a site visit. Let us say you are heading strategy, or you are heading L&D, or probably you are heading, let's say, people well-being or engagement. Do not try to, of course, more than 60 to 70% of your presentation should be on the details of your process, no doubt on that. But at the same time, it is also important for you to showcase as to how well it is integrated. When you say integrated, how is it that the leadership is also involved in employee engagement? What is the strategy? What is the HR strategy, and how is it linked to that? And maybe as a part of engagement, how is it that you are aligning with your other processes? These are the most important things that you must also try to showcase. Don't think that you need to speak only about the area where you are heading. Of course, that should take center stage, but it is also equally important as to how you liaise, or how is it that you are also playing your part in interlinking all the processes. That is equally important. That is what actually the assessment team looks out for. And I think yesterday we did discuss that in this model, the focus is more on the processes. So 60% weightage towards the enablers, and then 40% towards the results. That is where this model is a 60-40 model with an equal weightage of 12% across all the 5 enablers, and 20-20 split between 6A and 6B. And there was also another important, I would say, concept that we used yesterday about the lead and lag. Whenever you are designing any process, the first thing what you need to do is to design a lead indicator. A lead indicator is something that we are able to measure at any point of time. This is also what we call as the voice of the process. Lead indicators are measured repeatedly, regularly, at lesser frequencies, It can be daily, it can be weekly, it can even be monthly. But whereas when we are trying to look at lag indicators fall into two of them. One can be an outcome, one can be a business outcome, and one of them can also be under the area of perception. Whether it is perception or outcomes, we don't measure it day in and day out. Like for example, you will never be able to measure market share month on month. You will only be able to measure it once in 6 months or probably once in a year or so. The same thing holds good even with employee perception. So that is the reason why lag measures will take some time, and that is also one of the strong reasons as to why it is called a lag. For you to see the effect, it takes some amount of time. That's the reason why it is called as a lag indicator. But it is quite possible that you might be on the wrong tree. For you to make sure that you are able to achieve the outcomes, whatever you are trying to look into, it is important that you also drop some sort of milestones. And for that milestones, it should also be peppered with good lead indicators so that you know that you are on the right path as well as on the correct pace for achieving your intended outcomes. You cannot say if you don't have a good indicator, if you don't have a good tracking mechanism, then you might probably not be able to achieve the final goal, whatever you wanted. So there also has to be a good correlation between the lead and lag indicators. And it is not a one-to-one relationship. Many lead indicators could result into one lag. The best example is your ESAT survey, which you do, because the ESAT survey outcome is an amalgamation of so many different things. Unless until you engage, you involve, there is rewards, there is recognition, there is communication, because an ESAT survey contains so many different questions. It contains questions on leadership, it will contain something on L&D, it will talk about something on the processes, it will talk something about communication. So it is a sum total of many of them. It could even be a mix of both lead as well as lag. So you need to find out the correct lead and lag combination. It is not that there is a ready-made matrix which you can just use saying that, okay, I will look at this and the lag outcome will be fine. Well, you can prepare a matrix. I'm not saying that it is, you can't prepare, but the matrix may not continue to be the same at all points of time. So that was something on the lead and lag yesterday that we spent some time on. Anything else on this model or any of the concepts? Yeah, Vivek, you are right. The size of the boxes for the leadership and the HRM practices are a little bit skewed. I mean, the skew, yes, the skew, it is just a visual representation. The criterion weightage is not linked up to the size of the box. It is the only visual indicator is just for indicating that it is leadership which drives everything. Excellence is more of a top-down approach. And when we say the HR practices, yesterday I also shared with you as to how did the HR excellence model plus the 5 boxes come into picture. It is more about L&D being the focus because of the change in the business models and employees being very crucial, their involvement and engagement being, I would say, very crucial for us if we are to have a energized workforce, and also a strategy which is very central to the existence of any other or any organization for that matter. So if we try to take out these 4, the processes that are relating to leadership, L&D, strategy, and people well-being and engagement, all the others would come into box number 5. That's the reason why visually the box is also given a different dimension. So that was what we discussed yesterday. And then we also moved into the criterion of leadership, plus also something on the second one on the strategy. Just a minute, slide does not seem to be moving. Give me a moment. Yeah. So these were some themes that we discussed, even though there were around 6 to 8 questions. But going by the main themes, it talks about what is the long-term plan of the organization, what is the vision, purpose, etc. And then how is the organization structured, how is the leadership trying to be agile? How are they trying to foster a collaborative culture? How do they engage with the people mainly? And how do the leadership set an example for leading a customer-centric, building a customer-centric organization? And how does the leadership brand itself? These were some of the main points, even though they may not go into all the details, but these are the macro level highlights of criterion 1. Criterion 2,
Okay,
there were
so-
around, yes, please.
So can you just elaborate a bit more on leadership branding?
Okay, so when you say leadership branding, now many a time the organization is also synonymous with the leadership. Just to give you an example, as soon as the word, let us say, when you utter the word Tata, who comes to your mind? Or when you say Infosys, who comes to your mind? Either a Ratan Tata, or maybe today it might be a Chandrasekharan, or maybe it is an, when you say Infosys, it could be a Narayan Murthy. Of course, Salil Parekh, there are many other people also. But still, each and every organization would also have a sort of a face. So when you say that you are having a face, it also talks about the branding, because this branding will also be connected later as we go ahead. Most of the organizations, when you are looking at, many of you also participate in many external recognition programs or branding this thing, saying that we are such and such an organization, we have been ranked for position number 10, 11, etc. Fine. But at the same time, it is also the attractive or the mercurial leadership which also attracts many people. So there should also be a distinct effort for the leadership to be visible and also bring in that sort of a brand for the organization. Because a brand cannot be faceless. The more, I'm not saying that it must be a brand by only by one person, but if you are able to bring in many more faces, that would be all the more great. That would also make the organization very much visible. And that sort of a, I would say that visibility will only come in when the people start, when the leaders start gelling with the organization's internal people, plus also the external stakeholders for the right reason. So they must be visible in certain forums. Let us say, since all of you are coming in from the HR fraternity, maybe when you go out and maybe speak in a CI HR Excellence Conclave, or you speak in an NHRD forum, or you speak in some of the other committees, that is what is leadership branding. Because you are also trying to evangelize maybe many of the tenets of HR. You are standing out as an ambassador. So when you say that your people need to be ambassadors, the same way even leaders also need to be ambassadors. So that's how a leadership brand is also built. It is just about how do you create a rallying point? How is it that you brand yourself as an attractive organization? Like when you look at, I'm sure that since many of you would know Vineet Nair of HCL. I mean, he was a person who always said that people come first. So due to which he became a legend. And also HCL also, I'm not very sure now how is it. All of you, I mean, might know much better. But then people first, because everybody was always trying to say customer first. But then people first was the thing that HCL was able to bring about, which was a change. And it also built a huge brand for HCL. Yeah, you are right. Shubhadeep says that as per Jim Collins, great companies typically do not have rock star leaders. Won't leadership branding promote the worship of personality cult? Yes, there are, I would say, mixed answers to this. No doubt, it is not that. In fact, the answer is also there in your question. It does not have rock star leader. It also has rock star leaders. When you say leaders, it also speaks about distributed leadership. When you say distributed leadership, now you are not branding only HR, you are branding your organization, you are branding your company. There could be a supply chain head, there could be an HR head, there could be an operations head, there could be a marketing head. Each one of them can also be visible. So try to, when we say leadership, leadership is about a distributed brand of leadership. As to how is it that it is not about branding themselves. It is about actually branding the organization. And that's also one of the reasons as to why yesterday I said, when we say leadership, it means different levels of leadership. And each level of leadership has its task cut out. For example, it could be setting up the value systems, or it could be living up to the mission, or building that customer-centric culture extra. This is what is the job of the top and the senior management. Then as you come down the line, then the job of the people is more about emulating them in the areas that people understand. Let me try to give you an example of a people-centric leadership as well as a culture. Maybe the CEO was not a rock star. You would remember this happened around, as they say, AC, BC. This is before Corona, BC times. It happened around somewhere in the fag end of December or early January. There was one of the people who took up a photograph of an air hostess who was taking a nap, and he put it up on the social media saying that, look at it, Vistara's air hostess is sleeping while on duty. And as soon as that tweet, or I don't know, it was a tweet or whether it was on Facebook, as soon as it came up, within the next 1 or 2 hours, I think his name was Sanjay Kapoor. I think he has moved on from Vistara now. He immediately he actually rebuked the guy. He said, first of all, you had no business intruding the privacy of our staff, and she was taking a nap because the aircraft had not yet arrived. She was also in the passenger area where she was waiting for the next flight to arrive for the changeover, and you had no business trying to take a picture of her and then putting it on the social media. And that was hugely appreciated by the entire airline crew as well as the air hostesses, because he stood up for a cause. That is again leadership branding, standing up for the right reason, being visible. Or else, how many of you would have remembered the name of Sanjay Kapoor? So there are many ways by which you can stand up for your customers, you can stand up for your employees, you can stand up for various things, but ultimately you are building a brand for your organization. So that is what is the most important thing. Similarly, when we went into, I hope that was okay, Shubhadeep, got some, or in case if anybody else wants to share, it's absolutely fine. Please don't think that it's a one-way street. Kindly open up if you have some experiences, some examples, or in your existing organization or something generic, whatever you have heard. Please do feel free to share. This is also a learning platform as well.
Sir, one more query.
Yes, please.
Since most of these assessments, they are spread over a period of 3 years, like we are looking at the trends over a past period of 3 years, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there could be a scenario when the assessment team, when it goes to a particular company, you have a different leadership in place compared to the leadership which brought all those results in the past 3 years. So the leadership has changed. The work which was done had a different kind of flavor. The leadership which is there has a different flavor. So there might be a bit of a discrepancy between the two. How does the assessment team take care of these kind of discrepancies?
Yeah, good question. See, whenever there are changes in the leadership, one is irrespective of changes in the leadership. Well, each and every leadership team will bring a few traits, but actually as such, if you are looking at the culture or the ethos of the organization is not supposed to change. For example, let me try to take a few things that are there in the public domain. If you take, let's try to take some names that are easily remembered. When you say when Narayan Murthy was heading Infosys, or when the old tribe of Shibulal, Narayan Murthy and Nandan, when they were at the helm, what was Infosys known for? What was Infosys known for? In terms of a culture, what were they known for? Yeah, Anupriya says it is ethics. Yes. Maybe one more small tweaking. It was all about values. If you look at even the tagline the company had was, yes, you are right. They said driven by, powered by intellect, driven by values. So values were the key thing when the old, I would say when the founders were there. when from the founders, when the mantle got shifted to the professionals, like the current Salil or before Salil Parikh, we had Vishal Sikka, who was more of a rock star, just like how Shubhadeep was mentioning. So when Sikka came in, what was the culture? When Sikka came in, what was the culture? He even made some very explicit statements. What was that? Any idea? Yeah, rat race. It was all about performance. It was all about money. He said, "My name is Sikka and I believe only in revenue." He said, "We must only grow revenues, revenues, revenues." So that was what was his single mantra. So what I'm trying to say is, with changes in the leadership, certainly there will be small changes. But if you are looking at, but these are only some examples of very high profile organizations where there were too much of disturbances. But if you look at, there are so many other companies where things don't change. You take the example of, all of your, majority of you are from NTPC. If you're looking at NTPC, has the company's focus or the value systems or the core purpose, has it changed despite change in leadership? In fact, in public sector organizations, the leadership changes are much more pronounced, because every 2 years you have a change of your executive director, or probably it could be the unit head, etc. But still there is continuity in terms of whatever happens. The same thing does not happen in a BL, it does not happen in a BHL, or if you are trying to take, let's say, a private organization, maybe if you take an example of an L&T, you take a example of a Godrej or a Murugappa, things don't change like that. So ultimately what is important is continuity in terms of the thought and also in terms of purpose, impact. Yes, leadership styles will certainly change, but those are all manageable, subtle changes. Absolutely no issue, as long as the edifice of excellence, the core values or the customer centricity, those things are not touched. I think it's absolutely fine. There will be some small changes, but those are all to be expected. Each and every person individually is different. The way that he might drive might be a little bit different. All these are acceptable. That's not an issue, because it is quite possible that the previous leader, whoever was there, he might not be somebody who is very, very aggressive. Maybe he is somebody more of a conformist. Maybe the next guy who takes over is somebody, I will not say a rebel, but is somebody who believes in risk taking. Is somebody who is very aggressive. It is quite possible. The leadership style changes, and it is for the betterment of the organization. So I don't think assessors should find a problem in that. It is about how is it that the core objectives are being met, but at the same time, are people comfortable? And in case if there is a change in terms of the direction or the values, how well are people sensitized, and how is it that people are taken into confidence? That is what is the key thing what we need to look at, as long as they are in the right direction.
Shiva, regarding this leadership branding, I think leadership branding, or a sizable part of it, should also focus on the internal leadership branding. I'm not sure whether this external branding is adding to my bottom line or not. But the most important thing, I think, is how this leadership branding makes a brand image of the leader and aligns my people to the company's objectives and company's rules, so that there is cohesion inside, and that ultimately adds to my bottom line. So
yeah, that is. You are absolutely right. One is when we are trying to look at leadership branding, and the other ones, these are not things that will add up to the bottom line. It is about that pride. It is about that camaraderie. It is about trying to take people along. That is what does the trick. And the bottom lines, etc., they all come because of the employee engagement, because of the many of the other things. It cannot be straight away one-to-one attributed to leadership, and it is also wrong. Maybe it's not the right way to do that. It here, when we are saying leadership branding and then creating internal role models, it is for actually building the culture. Once you build a culture, once the organization is able to get its culture right, then obviously the high performance organization is something that it is a given. You may not be able to directly attribute it, but still it does play its part for sure.
Yeah, sure.
So next on the HR strategy, we discussed about the external inputs for strategy formulation, then about how is it that the organization is also performing internally on all its metrics, as well as some of the core areas where it wanted to perform as a part of its scorecard. And then in case if it is a geographically distributed organization, how does it take the bottom up? And we try to look at the bottom up plus as well as the top down approach. And then we look at the development of a scorecard, the objectives, the targets, as well as comparisons. And then what are the risks that are there, wherein the strategic objectives could potentially get derailed? How do these get de-risked? And then we also look at how the organization has been able to improve its strategy management processes over a period of time. So these are some of the things that we discussed in Criterion 2 yesterday. So with this, shall we go into Criterion 3? There is also a question by Shubhadeep. It says, does the model compare, just a minute, let me go to that. Does it look at organic leadership development vis-a-vis scouting leaders from outside? No, the model doesn't compare. But again, we are nobody to dictate that in an assessment. It is probably the organizations which many of them would want only homegrown leaders, but few companies have got a deliberate strategy which does encourage lateral hires, especially at a senior leadership level. Both of them have their own, I would say, advantages as disadvantages, both of them. Like what we have seen in different assessments, both in HR as well as business excellence, and whenever we look at many different things, organizations that are more diverse, who have, I would say, a lateral talent brought in, then you will see that they are not averse to taking risks. But at the same time, there is also some fresh blood coming in, some new thinking coming in. But there are organizations which only believe in organic leadership. There is nothing wrong in it because you have built a culture and you want that culture. And organizations like Toyota, etc., like I come from the Toyota stable, there they don't believe in importing leaders. They only believe in grooming leaders. That is fair enough. That is the ethos of the organization. I think we need to respect it. But the thing is, it is not about, there is nothing wrong in growing leaders internally within. But if the people, despite no lateral hiring happening, but despite the organic leadership, if people are open enough to understand the external world and bring out a lot of outside into the organization, then the organization is still on its path. So there is nothing wrong between any of the approaches. It all depends upon how the organization looks at it and how it drives it. No rights or wrong, and in an assessment, nothing is right or wrong. You can't say that companies which have an organic leadership growth pipeline is inferior when compared to a lateral ones. No, that might be a wrong thing to assume. I mean, there are many places where external people, where lateral hires have come in, but they have not been able to gel with the culture, or they have not been able to change the culture of the organization. There are pluses, minuses. There are hits and misses everywhere. So it's a mixed bag. Right. So we will go ahead to the next one, Criterion 3. Let me try to get into the Criterion 3 in the Excellence Model booklet. Give me a moment, I'll just pick up my water bottle. Let's get into Criterion 3 now. Criterion 3 is L&D. while we spent considerable amount of time on criterion 1 and 2, leadership and strategy, which is a little bit more, I would say, more abstract. Criterion 3, from 3, 4, 5, it is more or less easy, because all of you would know, because there are people who are this particular domain. So understanding this will not be so very tough. Let me get into criterion 3. Where is it? Straight away gone into results. So here we are into L&D, criterion 3. Very simple, straightforward questions. First thing is, it says, how is the HR strategy aligned with the L&D strategy? What is the L&D strategy to enable and enhance the organization's vision and achievement of its core objectives? When we say core objectives, it is not only the HR objectives, it has also got to do with the business objectives. Because when you're trying to look at L&D is supposed to help make people competent and help them to achieve the organizational objectives. So it is not only the HR one. So please remember that. Then the second one is, how does the L&D address talent management? When you say talent management, it is about the entire gamut of talent management. It is about attracting talent. It is about developing talent. It is about then also retaining talent. It speaks about the entire talent management cycle. And also it says, when we are trying to look at talent management, there is, again, now let me also try to bring some examples of how the model is also connected to the other boxes. When you're looking at leadership, in all the organizations, if you are looking at the leaders, one of the prime job of the leadership team is to enable a good pipeline of talent. Their job is also to look at succession planning as well as capability building and then filling in the leadership pipeline. So many a time, talent management or probably career planning or succession planning can also be linked to leadership. But when you're trying to talk about this in leadership, it is more at an apex level as to how leadership is driving. But here, when we are trying to discuss it in criterion 3, the focus is more on how talent management as a process is being managed. And also, you can even link up your talent management to many of the other things of branding, etc. That is also one of the reasons as to why many of the top talent also gets attracted to the likes of many of the top consulting firms, etc., which are there in the first line on the first day to take the entire talent. So when you're trying to look at this, look at the entire life cycle. And when you're saying talent management, it is quite possible that you might be talking about high parts, you might be talking about faster pace of growth for them. Their career planning will also be a little bit different when compared to probably the others. So even though career planning will come in criterion 5 as a topic, but when you are wanting to talk about anything to do with the high part management or the talent management, there is nothing wrong in talking about the career management for the identified talents or high parts in this criterion 3. That's absolutely fine. And then question C and D is trying to talk about how is it that you are trying to identify the people competencies, how do you look at the gaps, how do you look at the business scenario and then identify what are the knowledge gaps based on the way that the organization is wanting to move ahead based on its business objectives or the areas of growth. And then what are the different tools and techniques that you use to, one is to identify the gaps, plus also develop those competencies, and then maybe also close it along with a midterm plus as well as a long-term plan as well. And then there was another, I would say, quite a lot of discussion when it came to point number E, that whether should, just now we discussed about the leadership being grown organically plus also the lateral ones. Here also the discussion when the model was getting tuned was about should the company also use internal training resources or it should build those capabilities and competencies. Yes, I think it needs to be a good mix of both. You also need to get outside in. At the same time, you also need to have the train the trainer approach, or also create more of subject matter experts internally, because the outsiders will be able to give the breadth portion of it, while people who are internal to the organization are able to give that depth. So it is a mix of both the breadth and the depth, which will be useful. And that's where it also says that how does the organization develop or make use of internal training resources as well as subject matter experts, because outsourcing the entire L&D function is not a great idea. Then you are also becoming a parasite. At the same time, you are not trying to tap onto the tacit knowledge of the people who are internally available within the organization. So you need to have a good mix of both of them. That is what is that point number E. Then there are a few other things. It also says that maybe how is it that you are trying to make sure that you are trying to ensure the people competencies, considering mobility options as well as future employability across functional, geographical, or business requirements. Like if I am to take the example of NTPC, people could move from maybe thermal to this to that. There are also generalists, there are also specialists as well. So you could see that there are many requirements in certain MNCs saying that if you are wanting to head the unit, then you must have at least, you must have run the business for around 2 or 3 different locations. Only then you can sit in this chair. If you are wanting to take this particular role, you must have a stint in A, B, C for this particular period of time. That is when you become grounded. That is how you become rounded as well. So there are many such requirements that many companies have got. When you say future employability, it has also got to do with business models becoming redundant. You don't know, because that is where the point of agility also comes into picture. Because if you are not agile, if you are not able to skill and reskill your people, then people tend to become redundant. So one is your business model should also be sharp, that you are able to skill and skill as well as reskill your people to meet the future or the new requirements. If not, in case of some exigency, at least you must make an effort to make sure that people find a good place. I think this happened very recently when the pandemic started, when the airline industry went through a huge, I would say, downsizing. Then many of those people were picked up by the hospitality companies, and now even hospitality is also down. But since both the hospitality or probably the airline, both of them are associated with service, but then many people have still been able to find many of the others. So that's what is about employability. It is about mobility within the organization, across the organization. There are quite a lot of things, but ultimately it is about how is it that you are able to make people skilled as well as reskilled to meet the emerging challenges, both I would say as a part of the emergent strategy, plus also as a part of your own growth strategy, both of them. Then it also talks about how is the leadership drive towards making it a resilient organization. How do you build the leadership capability? How do you build a roadmap? How do you identify your critical positions? How do you assess the quality of the leadership of your pipeline? How do you assess the drop dead situations, etc.? Those are some things both from a leadership perspective as well as the adequacy, because it is the L&D function which actually builds the leadership pipeline. It is only that the leadership will take a long-term view and they will give you the direction. Ultimately, the activity has to be done by or led by the L&D function. And point number H talks about, it is not only about trying to make sure that the competency of your people are improved. It is also important to make sure that people in your own department or your own function are also taken care of. Because if you are not correct, how can you make your people correct? So also try to look at the knowledge and the competency of the HR staff as well. Then the last 2 questions is important. The new one, especially point number I, is important. It says, what are the systems and processes deployed to assess and enhance the competencies of people in your business ecosystem? Meaning to say that outsourced employees, third-party specialists, as well as people who are maybe subject matter experts, etc. How are you also trying to see that their knowledge is correct? Now you might ask, why should we look at all this? Anyway, we have outsourced it because there is a business advantage. So why do you need to look at it? Any questions or thoughts on this? Maybe before I give the answer. what is the need for you for enhancing the competency of your people who are many processes which you have already outsourced? Any thoughts on this?
Perception, sir. Perception.
I was not able to say. Yeah, Vandana says it is required to look at the standards of delivery. That is fine. Next, what else? Any other points? What is the need for enhancing the competencies of the people in the outsourced roles?
That is because they are ultimately working for you. They are ultimately working for you. So whatever they are doing, that is impacting your business. So naturally, you have to ensure that they have the right skill sets and they are able to perform. They are able to give the right degree of performance, and for that they need to be developed and they need to be engaged and they need to be cared for also. All these things, they have to be treated as employees in that context.
I think that's right. Also, I think Ziaur Rahman also says that directly or indirectly contribute to the outputs. That's the truth. So what we are also trying to look at is, see, you might have outsourced, but if you do not know what is current in that particular area, their performance might also be suboptimal. It does not mean that you have to train all the outsourced people. That's not the point. If, let us say, there is a contractor who is supplying you trained manpower, if you are able to influence upon the contractor that, look, this is not current or this is how people need to be competent, then the people who is going to get deployed at your end, if they are sharper, it only aids you. Your productivity is good. Even the contractor is also happy. There is a mutual win-win. So please do not leave that at the mercy of the contractor and just do not look at it as an outsourced process. Believe me, it is adding on to your top line as well as your bottom line, because it has all got to do with efficient work practices. So it is required. And again, the last point is a new one. There is also a take, even though it talks about a learning culture, later when you get into criterion 5, this also gets a different shape. The same question will be repeated, but I will not say it is repeated. It comes in a different form. There, it comes under the garb of knowledge management, because knowledge management is a science by itself. But whereas here in point number J, it says, how is it that your L&D interventions as an organization is trying to build up the culture of being a learning organization? How is it that L&D as a function is able to play its part in creating a culture of learning? That hunger or that passion or that thirst for learning, how is it that you are able to do? And that is where you will slowly start moving towards being a knowledge organization, which will come again in criterion 5. And those of you who are wanting to link up all of them, you must try to link both criterion 3 as well as criterion 5. When I say criterion 3, the last point in criterion 3, as well as one of the points of knowledge management in criterion 5, here is where you actually do the seeding. You do the seeding for a learning organization in criterion 3. When you go to criterion 5, you are actually reaping the benefit of a knowledge organization through knowledge management. So those are at different phases, different levels of maturity. So that's about criterion 3. Okay. Yeah, Shubhadeep, you are sharing something. You said that there is a difference between an audit and an assessment. Maybe you can also share some of your thoughts. What is it? I was not able to get that line with respect to what point. Please unmute yourself and please do share. Okay, maybe later, not a problem. So we'll get into now criterion 4. So criterion 4, we are into people well-being, engagement and inclusion. Again, this is a straightforward criteria. It is very clearly, this criterion is split into 3 areas. If you're looking at the apex, what does it say? It says that excellent organizations value their people. They create a work environment which meet the people needs and expectations. And at the same time, the ambience of the organization also gives that element of inclusiveness and builds in that sort of a morale, which also which gives people a superior employee experience. And why the word employee experience? And today, all of you must realize that the world has moved beyond satisfaction. Today, it is not about customer satisfaction. Today, it is about customer experience. From satisfaction, the world has moved from customer satisfaction to customer delight. From delight, it has moved on to experience. So the same way, even in the area of HR, even though we use the word employee satisfaction, but satisfaction is already past. Today, satisfaction is more or less a hygiene. If you need to distinguish yourself as an organization in HR, then you need to move beyond being being an employer whose employees are satisfied. You need to move into delight. You need to move into experience. If you are at a satisfaction level, move into delight. If you are in delight, you need to move into experience. So that's where the world is moving in, and that's where HR also needs to move going forward. Let's get into some of the questions that are there as a part of it. So let's get into this point A, work environment. Work environment is one section over here. When we say work environment, the first point it says, how do you create an equitable and an inclusive environment? And there are a few space bars missing during the, when they were trying to create this document. So kindly excuse us for that. I think in the next version, it will be corrected. Sorry for that. So how does the organization ensure that it provides opportunities by creating an equitable and an inclusive environment, as well as encourage a culture of mutual support and team spirit across segments? And more important point is, it is including those people who are involved in outsourced activities. Meaning to say that, how is it that you are able to create a good working environment for all the categories of people as based on the strata, whatever you have got? And then the second one also talks about a safe and a healthy working environment for people at all levels. And accessible infrastructure is a new point that has come in, because we say that we are an equal opportunity employer, we don't distinguish. But then when you are saying that you are an equal opportunity employer, you don't distinguish. But if you don't have the facility or the infrastructure to make it happen, then it means that we are only doing lip service. Today there are concepts of green buildings, there are concepts of accessible buildings where people with disabilities, where people who are physically challenged or who are differently abled, there are infrastructure facilities for everyone. They don't feel anything different. Because believe me, people also do not want to take anybody's help for getting their work done. Like it so happened that in one of the very leading organizations, that was around 2 to 3 years back, maybe I was not too very probably conscious of that fact, not even 3 years back, I think it must have been more than 5 or 6 years back, when visually challenged person was coming down. One of the visitors who was coming in was trying to help him out. But then that gentleman, he refused. He said, please do not worry. The organization has given us enough infrastructure and safety aids so that we feel comfortable. Thanks for your help, but no offense meant. So that was an acknowledgement that the organization has taken care of all the facilities and infrastructure to make them very comfortable. So it is not only about trying to put a policy in place. It is about how do you make that policy work, and how is it that people who are using that feel really comfortable and they do not feel embarrassed. That is what is the true conviction that an organization needs to display if they say that they are an inclusive organization. Similarly, going ahead, there are a couple of other questions. It also talks about employee relations, including grievance handling. How are the relations with formal employee groups enhanced for mutual value add. Now, I think in India, slowly we are moving away from the culture of IR. IR does not exist. It is more about mutual win-win. Today, I think maybe whether whoever are the bargaining groups that are there internally within the organization, they also know what is the importance of the job, what is the importance of being competent, how is it that they can also contribute to the organization and then also be a part of that journey within the organization. So maybe those are also some areas where now there are, I would say, many positive shoots. The days of industrial unrest are more or less over. And even today, as we are seeing, despite this pandemic, I think even though there are a few organizations where we have seen layoffs, we have seen quite a few of the things because of business reasons, and more or less, I think organizations have been quite humane so far, and we have not seen major industrial unrests so far. And then the last one is also about is a part of the work environment. How does the organization collect ideas from the different stakeholders and also engage themselves in designing the programs as well as even the ambience? Like very recently in Mumbai, one of our clients whom I regularly go to, it is more of a retail facing organization. They redid their entire workspace trying to take the inputs from all their employees. At the end of the day, more like an office, it looks like an informal, I would say something like a chai point, where somebody can have a con call within the passage. It is securely enclosed. There are sort of those pods that you see in the airport. And many a time, if you're looking at, we would be designing meeting halls which can accommodate 10 people. But when 2 people are meeting over there, then the remaining 8 chairs are vacant and nobody can make use of that room because that room is lost. So here the employees were very creative. They gave a suggestion and a solution to the management in terms of creating so much of ambience within the workspace. Whether you are talking to somebody, whether there are 2 people, whether there are 4 people, I mean, it's a win-win for everyone. And incidentally, that was designed by the employees and nobody had any complaints. So it is about listening to the voice of your employees and then involving them so that you are able to make the work environment much more vibrant. So that's about work environment. I think one of the ways wherein we really need to look at work environment and then making it vibrant are when you go to some of the new age organizations. Believe me, I had an opportunity to visit or assess a BPO long back. I think we have Priyanka over here. Maybe later she can share some insights. I mean, BPOs are something that all of us would have experienced at some point of time when we get a call from someone. And you know what is a sort of a work environment which a BPO really needs to build it. Because you are talking with irate customers, you are talking with customers who have got a very short fuse. I mean, it is very easy. All of us can always recollect how we speak to many of the places when we call up a call center. And imagine if a call center or a BPO has to keep up the efficiency, but still they need to keep the employee morale with all this. The sort of engagement methodologies that get into making that workplace vibrant is totally different. And this is where, as assessors, you will need to be careful. If, let us say, you have been in a single organization, many of you have been, you have been in NTPC for your lifetime, more than 20 or 25 years. Tomorrow, believe me, if you go and walk into, let us say, Priyanka's company for doing an HR excellence assessment, believe me, you might be zapped. You might be thinking, "Arey, yahan pe kya ho raha hai? Is this a mela or this is an organization? What is this work environment?" But it is required. And maybe Priyanka, you can share some insights about a BPO. I think it would be good for everybody to know. Because all of us look into continuity, right? Many of us say, agar koi initiative le raha hai, to it should run for 2 years, 3 years. Trend kaise dikhayenge, target kaise dikhayenge, how will we be able to do it? In a BPO, it is a flavor of the week. It is a flavor of the day, flavor of the month. When you go to assess such an organization, you must not say, "Arey, kya ho raha hai? What is this? Every week they are doing something. Then where are the results? How can they do?" Now you need to understand the context of a BPO, how they work. and what are the needs and expectations of people. Now, when you are walking into an NTPC, when a recruit is walking into an NTPC, I'm 100% sure that he is trying to look at least a minimum horizon of around 10 years or probably 15 years or even 20 years. But when somebody is walking into a BPO, there he is only looking at a very transactional engagement. He might be there only for 6 months or 1 year or 2 years. He is not looking out for becoming an engagement manager. While there are people who are wanting to or aspiring to be that, but they're not. They're looking out for a career. So there, the environment, the workplace ambience is something that is totally different. Priyanka, can you just explain a few facets just to give our friends a different perspective as well?
That is true, Shiva. Actually, I agree. In BPOs, majority of our population that we deal with are millennials. And it requires a completely different aspect of employee engagement, to deal with those millennials, be it in the workplace or even during these times, especially, when this pandemic struck us and most of us resorted to remote working. So shifting a BPO entirely to a remote location was very, very challenging. And then designing, so every day these engagement activities keep on changing. So virtual employment, employee engagement activities, I could name a lot, using online platforms, because with millennials, you need to be very, very active on Facebook, Viber, Instagram, TikTok now, of course, is banned. But, there are games, riddles, e-newsletters, virtual R&R, e-vouchers, virtual appreciation certificates, and these are all to be done on the spot because, they take calls and they need to get immediate appreciation for that. So it requires not only for these agent staff, but also for their supervisors, for their team leaders as well. We need to really educate them to come up with such engagement programs, which change every week. Slack groups for employee engagement, bingo games through Zoom. I mean, there are n number of social media interactive quizzes, riddles, birthday celebrations via Zoom, pulse surveys on a daily basis that needs to be done to gauge the level of engagement. So it's really dynamic if you consider, the engagement for a BPO.
That's true. Thanks, Priyanka. Maybe I think all of you must have got a feel of how it feels to do a pulse survey every day, because every day it is about how do you gauge the pulse of the employees, whether are they engaged, whether is there an element of vibrancy. So, all of us would think that a pulse survey or something is more of a dipstick that we do once in 6 months. Now here they might do it within a week or within a fortnight. So this is where, I repeat, this is where understanding the context of an organization will become very, very, very important. Workplace ambience, workplace environment for a manufacturing industry, for a service industry, with millennials, each one of them is different. So no one answer will work. So you will have to look at what is appropriate to the nature of the activities, to the context of the business, and then are they doing it right? That is what is true engagement. That is what is truly the agility of the HR processes. Because traditionally we are given to believe, when you say process maturity, we always would think that process means वहाँ पे एक SOP होना चाहिए. No doubt SOPs are required. Even they will also have SOPs. All of you will also have SOPs. But the way that the SOPs are crafted, the longevity of that, or the change, the way that you change, or the periodicity with which you are going to track the success of those initiatives, they will all differ from industry to industry. And this is where you will need to wear the cap of an assessor and you will need to take out that cap of an auditor. So it will be totally different. Believe me, the more and more you do assessments, the more you go to different industries, something that is totally different from your organization, you will come much more enriched, and you will also be much more innovative within your own organizations in terms of designing many different initiatives. So more about that. Let's get into the next section. Also, the last one is also about describe the practices in an organization for a healthy work-life balance, considering the reality of a network world, globalization, new ways of working. Now these days we speak about new normal. Obviously, while we speak about new normal, working from home is not the new normal. I don't think working from home can never replace, for example, the sort of engagement that we have or the thoughts that we share when we are in an in-person program vis-a-vis a virtual program. It's always different. No doubt this is convenient. It is much more lighter on the pocket for the company because of the travel and the others. But then in CII, let me also tell you that we have so many rewards, recognitions, best practice sharing, etc. The joy of receiving a certificate or a prize, something on stage in front of 500 people is different. And then getting a thalia in a virtual, in a competition is something different. So, yeah, well, as of now, it is more of a compulsion. We don't have a choice, but I'm sure that there are a lot of things that we need to take away from this in terms of designing the workspace, or it could be engagement. Few things will still stand the test of time. Few things we may need to go back. Few new things, whatever we have learned, we should also not forget that. So all those things are a mix. Similarly, when we come to this employee support climate, here it is more about the softer portions of the workplace ambience and support. Like it says, describe policies and processes, both financial and non-financial, to sustain people involvement. Like, for example, all these years, POSH was not known. Now, more or less, it is known. Companies do have POSH committees, but still, in a few companies, the majority of the POSH initiative is much better. In few places, it is still not all that great. Similarly, if you are looking at RPWD, the awareness is very, very low. We brought it consciously into the last year because when you say excellence, excellence needs to go beyond compliance. POSH was introduced or was looked upon by many organizations, even though it was not something like a hygiene factor earlier. Now it has more or less become a hygiene factor. Now RPWD is something that people are slowly trying to recognize. And when you are saying that we are being inclusive, people are trying to create a ambience. Like very recently, I think the Tata Group announced that formally they are having transgenders in many of their different businesses. Now it is not about only a policy. The top management might have given a policy saying that go ahead and then hire them. It is about how is it that you are making your people to accept them? How is it that you are making that person who is coming in to gel seamlessly and work without any inhibitions? So that is about that culture. That is about that trying to provide that cultural training, etc. It is not about only creating a policy. It is about making that policy work and making people to accept those things as a part of that change. That is what is more important. I mean, many of you might have gone to Lemon Tree Hotel. If you look at as a part of their policy, more than 60% of the boys and girls whom they employ are all people who are not able to hear or they are hard of hearing. But still, they have been able to train them so very well that without you speaking a word, they will be able to understand what is your requirement. They'll be able to meet your thing. And they have created that sort of an ambience both within those employees as well as the patrons who go to that particular hotel or that restaurant. And people are today much more happy. They don't say that, no, I only need to be served by such and such a person. They'll be more than happy to be a part of a social cause. That is what is being a truly inclusive organization as well. So that's about the softer portion of it. Similarly, there are a few more things. How are you trying to make sure that the benefits and all the others, how is it that you are able to make sure that the diverse workforce based on employment conditions, gender, etc., how do you make it a little bit custom made or specific? And then also the financial and the non-financial benefits as appropriate. It is not that we are not saying that the people who are not on rolls should also get the same salary. No. But you have introduced a business model for Equas. But how are you making those people comfortable? And how is it that you are able to give them that sort of I would say, a support when it is required, making them comfortable? That is what is the key. And then just now, I think Priyanka shared the point of now this is where it becomes very important. And when you look at all these points are all very generic, but there is no need for all of you to answer each and every one of this point. That is where you need to look at the context of the organization and see where you need to make use of in the assessment. It says that how does the organization create appropriate recognition platforms, traditional, virtual, tech enabled, to recognize alignment to the business goals and objectives, etc. Now, what Priyanka shared is they said that every day they give out e-vouchers, etc. Now, that is unheard of in an industry like NTPC or probably any other manufacturing industry. There it might be different. Fair enough. But what we need to understand is what works in organization A may not work in organization B because of the culture, because of the business model, because of the type of the sector in which they are operating. So try to customize this as appropriate. So next comes employee satisfaction. This is straight away. It says describe the formal or informal measures in like surveys, FGDs, etc. It is not saying that surveys should be the only tool. What it says is use formal and informal measures. Try to see what do your people think about employee well-being, satisfaction, communication needs, etc. There are various ways. What are the listening posts that you have in your organization to enable that? How do you listen? How do you respond? How do you design? Then how do you also look at the lead and the lag indicators? How do you understand the lead and lag indicators and link it up to employee satisfaction and go back and work on these processes also? Similarly, it says employee wellness. Describe the organization's well-being and engagement strategy that addresses a list of holistic enablers. I think today it is all the more important in these times. Today, all of us are working from home. Our workspaces in the house, if you're looking at in one room, maybe your son or daughter might be over there, and then you are taken up one space, there is somebody else. I mean, all of us have seen so many different WhatsApp of mothers trying to say that don't think that this is your office, etc. So yes, these are different things. But then how is it that you are able to make things much more comfortable? And the challenge is much more for tech companies. Tech companies are probably like companies of the likes of Priyanka, wherein it is very difficult. It is very difficult. You have got client confidentiality, you have got access rights. There are so many other challenges. How do you make all this happen? And how do you virtual working? Obviously, I'm sure that all of us have realized is not pleasurable. Earlier, people were thinking, "Arey kya yaar, ye to work from home. He can work at any time." Today, people have realized the pain or the pleasure of working from home. What works for one industry or one sector doesn't work for everyone else. So how do you make sure that people are able to contribute their best? Both how do we take care of their physical, mental, emotional, as well as their spiritual or whatever you can take. You are trying to talk about a holistic well-being, and this is a brand new criteria. This was not there. All this has come in because of the new ways of working, because of, we working across different geographies, working with different cultures. So that's where employee wellness also came in, because now it is more or something like a network world. You are supposed to be available 24/7. You are supposed to be connected always, but there is also a toll that it takes on the, I would say, the mental well-being of the people or the person. Today, all of us know that maybe we are working for more than 14 or 15 hours a day when compared to our normal routine of probably 12 hours, which we used to spend in our organization. So there is a lot of pressure. How do you make things eased up so that people still continue to be productive? That's about wellness, which is a new criteria from 2019. Then there are also some notes over here. Inclusive companies build a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. And they also have equal access and opportunities and resources so that they are able to contribute to the organization's success. And companies like NTPC and quite a few of you, I think you have got a very, very diverse workforce. There are many shades of that when you see even the BPCL document too. And there are many organizations who have also signed up to what is called as an affirmative code of action. So these are all, of course, these are all not mandated by law. It is more about how is it that the organizations are going to go a couple of steps ahead in terms of trying to make a change or also be a change and be an industry, I would say, beacon in terms of leading those changes. So those were some things over here, and even the definition of that holistic well-being, that is also something that is given over here. So that's about criterion 4. And as I said, again, while broadly there are 3 areas of work environment, employee support climate, as well as employee wellness, the points below that, you need to see what makes sense to you given your context. If you are an applicant, please do not think that you need to answer each and every point. You try to look at employee wellness as a single subject. You look at work environment as a subject. Read the questions. See what suits your context, what is it that you have done, and you can address the central essence of that particular criterion. There is no need for you to go word by word. Then again, it is not an assessment, then it gets degenerated into an audit. And you are also trying to see that this is not an assessment, this is an audit for which I need to mandatorily give an answer. In fact, what we also say is there is nothing called as an ideal position report. My request is when you are seeing the BPCL report, please don't think that it is an ideal document on which you should base your position report on. No. One is, it is a case study that is being given to make things simple for you. There are many things that BPCL is doing which have already been removed from the document because you need to find certain OFIs as a part of your learning. At the same time, BPCL, while they have given some information, they could have given it something much better also. So the document also had its share of a few missing things. At the same time, from CII also we have doctored that case study so that you are able to find a few OFIs. So all in all, there is nothing called as a ideal template document. And our request is never make the mistake of asking a consultant to write your position report. It will do more harm than good. Because a consultant might be able to write it in flowery words, but he will not be able to convey the passion which you have in whatever you have done in your organization. With all due regards to consultants, I don't think there are any consultants over here, at least in this group. But my request is, please try to be yourself when you are trying to write your position report. There are no marks for the position report. Of course, when I say no marks, the award admin secretariat will do a cursory check of a first-time applicant or somebody who has taken a break for 2 or 3 years, so that there is something in the document that can be assessed. Because if the document does not score 400, it can't be given to an assessor team, because they are going to invest hundreds of hours in terms of going through that, etc. So at least it has to cross a particular threshold of 400, a score of 400. So due to which there will be a cursory check by the award admin secretariat to look at the quality of the contents. Many first timers, though not in HR excellence, in few of the others it had happened. They were looking that this is something like a company annual report. Jisme pura there are only photographs of employees, only leaders giving the prize distribution ceremony. No. What we require is the detail on the processes. What we require is the detailed segmented results. If those are not given, then the assessors would find it very, very difficult to do a desktop assessment. So in a desktop assessment, your document should cross 400 to enable a site visit for an assessment. That is the first point. And then the other thing is, as I said, while your document, when it has been assessed, you might get a 450 or 500 or whatever. But when we go into the site, or even in case if it is a virtual assessment, when we go deeper, maybe the organization might be doing all the right things. So the score will be much higher. The score will not be based on the document, whatever is given.